Welcome to Education Forum. I'm Herman Badillo, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the City University. The improvement of education affects all New Yorkers. This program will focus on the key educational issues and challenges before us all. My guest today is Seymour Fliegel, who is the President of the Center for Educational Innovation and the Public Education Association. He's a graduate of City College, where he got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and then he went to work in the public school system and ended up in East Harlem. The time he came to East Harlem, the East Harlem school district was the bottom one of all of the 32 districts in the city. And he came up with an idea of trying to develop new programs, and that's really where the idea of school choice comes from originally. He and Tony Alvarado, who was then the superintendent of that district, brought the East Harlem district very high up on the scale in a short period of time. And from there, he became district superintendent in Queens, and then he established the Center for Educational Innovation, and now he is involved in something like 88 schools in New York City alone. So you really have built up quite an empire, right?
Well, it's all public schools, and you know there's no empire in public education. But there are schools we work with. We believe very strongly in public education. And our issue is a simple one. Once you can demonstrate that you can have a meaningful education for the children of the poor, then that is the issue. So you can no longer blame the kids, you can't blame the community, because we have enough examples. The KIPP Academy in the South Bronx, Frederick Douglass in Central Harlem. All over the city, we have schools in inner city communities that are offering a quality education to youngsters.
And they're offering it with the current school funding, right? They don't have any special funding.
Absolutely, same funding, just a different way of looking at youngsters. And you got to start with a real belief that you can educate these youngsters. Now, one of my big arguments, you know, it's not enough for the proponents of public education, which I'm one of, to say it is the heart of a democratic society, then have failing schools. You got to have quality schools, and there are ways to do it. And I think there's been enough of a demonstration. I can give you the one that you know very well. Benjamin Franklin was, I think, in my opinion, 1982.
That's on 116th Street in East Harlem, right?
In East Harlem and
yeah.
the Drive. In 1982, it was the worst high school in the city of New York.
Right.
7% of the kids who entered graduated. The attendance was 44% if they took it at 11 o'clock, never in the afternoon. We got Frank Macchiarola, who was a friend, who was then chancellor, to close that school, give it to the district. We were still in the district then. And Cole Genn, who's a senior fellow at the CEI-PEA, became the principal. 4 years later, every kid graduated, every kid went to college. Now, once you establish that, you can educate the children of the poor, there's no excuse.
Okay, how did you do it? That's the question.
Okay. It's never simple, Herman, as you know. But you have to have a few basic principles you start with. One is that you can educate these kids, and I think that's been established. We believed in there's no one best school. If there were one best school, we'd all create that one best school, but you can't do it. There's no one best way to learn. So then you have to have diverse schools and diverse approaches. Two, you have to have high expectations. But Herman, everyone is for high expectations. All I want is them to implement those high expectations. There's one thing to say you're for high expectations, but you have to deliver. Small schools allow you to do it, by the way.
Okay, but you see, everything you said, everyone agrees on, or at least they say they agree upon. There's nobody I know who will say that kids cannot learn. Everybody says that kids can learn.
That's right.
Everybody believes in high expectations.
Right.
But it's not happening. Right?
Okay, let's take the high expectation.
Yeah.
It's how you treat people, how you treat youngsters, that determines how they behave. It's not what you say. So if you treat a youngster as a thug, I promise you, he's going to be a thug. You treat him as a worker. I can't tell you how many kids I've said, you know, you got a job in this school. The kid always says, what's my job? I didn't know I worked there. You're a learner here. Once you start treating kids that way, they start acting that way. I could tell you a whole story on high expectations. It's a true story. You might like it. You could use it on some other show.
Okay, go ahead.
A minister told it to me, so I know it's true. In Florida, there's a law that says you cannot use IQs to educate the kids or place them and so on. So in this school, every school has what they call that class. It was the worst class in the school. No one could handle them. The principal called down Mrs. Dougherty, said, I'm giving you that class. She takes it over, she's having trouble. So she comes down to the office, the principal's not there, she walks in and she takes a look at the records. And next to the name she sees 127 up to 159. She goes back to the class, says, you're the smartest class in this school, you're the smartest class in this district, things are going to change. 2 months later, they're the best class in the school. Principal calls it down, what happened? And she admits, I looked at what she thought was their IQs. And as she's leaving, he says, by the way, those were their locker numbers. But she treated them like they were bright kids. And they started behaving. It's a critical thing. So that's the difference I make with expectations. I think focus on learning. Too many schools don't focus on learning. I think you've heard me say this before. When I was a principal, I had a sign up on my board. It was a quote from a teacher. I taught that, but the children didn't learn it. And I said, define taught as it is used in that sentence. To our way of thinking, and successful schools feel this way, nothing is taught until something is learned. I'd never say to you, I taught my son Andrew to swim. Unfortunately, whenever he gets in the water, he seems to sink to the bottom of the pool. Now, I may have told him, move your arm, kick your legs. Nothing is taught until something is learned. Good schools focus on learning.
Okay, now one of the things that you've done at your center is to develop some schools in conjunction with the City University.
Okay.
Tell us about some of those.
And, well, there's the Queens College
also,
Lab School.
What kind of schools are they? Elementary,
There's
secondary?
an elementary school for really basically math, science, and technology that should be a teaching education school. Our belief is a school of education should have a school on its campus. I mean, would you go to a medical college that doesn't have a hospital?
Right.
So that's what we did up in Queens. But we're doing something else with Baruch and with Hunter and City. City, I think, just joined us. We're creating a center for educational learnership that you folks, your trustees, created that. There was a resolution on that.
Right.
We know there aren't enough principals right now. So we are going to find future principals using the superintendents in New York City to identify people who say, I think this person would be a good principal. Then we're going to educate them in terms of getting them the certification. And then we're going to get them a paid internship, hopefully, if the chancellor comes along with it. And then we'll have, I think in just a few years, you'll have 100 highly qualified principals. There are no principals available throughout the country.
How many are needed now in New York City?
Well, they're going to anticipate that there's going to be close to 100 principals leaving within the next year or 2 years. Now, leadership is the critical factor in any field, particularly in education. So we have to develop our own leaders. You know, whenever, you and I have had this discussion many times, even at CUNY, when they go to get presidents at CUNY, they have these national searches. They bring some guy from Oklahoma who doesn't know New York City exists, doesn't know who the mayor is, certainly doesn't know where to go. We want to get people who understand what inner city school kids are about, what they need, who have lived here, who work here, and we'll make them the principals.
Okay, now you're also doing that with teachers, aren't you? Because teachers are perhaps even more important.
Yes, well, teachers are a critical
And also
factor.
there's a greater need of teachers.
There's tremendous. Well, that's what you guys are doing. I mean, I'm not doing it. CUNY is
but
doing
you're
it.
also providing
We're
some
working
training
with,
for
We're
teachers,
working
yeah.
with them,
Yeah.
but CUNY is doing that, and I think CUNY should take a major role in the public schools in New York City. And I think that's what you're talking about when you want schools. Now, I'm not sure,
Well, the
but
problem is we do take a major role, but unfortunately it has not been good because we provide a larger percentage of teachers for the New York City public school system than any other university. But unfortunately, many of those teachers are not really prepared for teaching, and they go into schools that end up as failing schools.
Well,
so that's what I want to change.
Well, the Center of Educational Leadership that you set up, we have Lorraine Monroe, who's one of the great principals in New York City, and she's now at the CEI-PEA. She is training 35 principals and their co-leaders in New York City public schools. And she is training them, not just saying, here, take a course. She's telling them, what do you do? For example, she says, what are you going to do the first day? They said, we're going to have a conference. She says, no. What are you going to say at the conference? You come back next week. The rest of us will be your staff, because that's when things happen. That's what leadership is about. You got to lay out what are the goals, what's the dream, what's the mission, and then things begin to happen. So we're quite active, we're quite busy. I want to see, quite honestly, a bigger role for CUNY in the leadership training, because I think you know that most of the training for principals and superintendents has been outside of CUNY. Now, why shouldn't CUNY, which is part of the city of New York, be part of that training?
Well, as you know, we just set up a dean for education, because I wanted to coordinate all of the different schools of education. And here at the Graduate Center, where we have the television studios, we now have a PhD in education, which we never had before, in order that we can provide the even better resources to those who are studying with us.
You see, Herman, for too many years, schools in New York City, colleges in New York City, even those who are across the street from a public school, have had very little to do with those schools. It's time that the colleges said we have a responsibility to the children in those schools, because then you can get some wonderful things going. And I know you and I have discussed that. I think the Queens College School is a good example. I think we're considering, I think the board is considering, a charter school up at Lehman with Gilda Lehrman on American Studies.
How's that coming along? Because that is to teach American history. Right.
And you're aware, we did help create the Academy of American Studies in Long Island City, which turns out to be one of the best schools in New York City without any entrance requirements, and whose population is mainly kids who are the children of immigrants. So the point is the same point. You can educate these kids. So if we can educate these kids, let's start doing it, and let's start doing it in more places. There's no excuse not to educate the kids in the inner city.
Okay, we'll be back after these announcements.
Do you think you have the power to change the world?
I can change the world one child at a time.
I know I can make a difference in those children's lives.
I teach.
I teach.
Yes, they're teachers, but to the kids they reach, they're heroes.
I teach.
Do you have the power to wake up young minds, to be someone's hero? Teach, to make an impact on our future. Call 1-800-45-TEACH. Be a teacher, be a hero.
We're back today with Seymour Fliegel, the president of the Center for Educational Innovation and the Public Education Association. Sai, in your organization, you started some new ideas. For example, you have the Young Men's Leadership School. Tell us about the Young Women's Leadership School. Tell us about that.
Okay. It's interesting, Herman. You know, the idea, Ann Tisch, who's one of our trustees, said to us, why don't we have a girls' school? And everyone had the standard answer, you
Just
know.
a girls' school?
Yeah, Young Women's Leadership School is a girls' school.
Mm-hmm. No, but I mean, isn't there opposition to the idea of an all-boys or an all-girls school?
All girls.
Yeah. Okay.
So it started off with the first reaction of the system and everyone else was, it's unconstitutional.
Right.
So I said, wow, those guys must have been smart when they wrote their Constitution. They figured out how to assign schools in East Harlem before East Harlem had a school system. And suddenly it turned out that it's not unconstitutional, that we used to have single-sex schools in New York City. Yeah. And, you know, I have a standing rule.
I went to Harron High School, which was all boys.
Yeah. I have a standing rule. What's good for the children of the wealthy, I'm happy to take for the children of the poor. You notice in New York City, you have Greeley and Spence. If rich people think it's not going to hurt their kids to send them to a single-sex school, I think we can give that opportunity to the children of the poor. So we created the school, and Ann Tisch was very important in that school. It's a wonderful school.
And nobody has challenged the constitutionality.
Oh, of course, it was challenged, not to court, but the New York Civil Liberties Union raised questions. So down at the Department of Education, in the Civil Rights Division, there's something going on, but nothing is going on. The school is doing exceptionally well. You know, I visit that school often, and I remember coming there like 3 months after it opened, and the young women were different. Because
is that an elementary school, middle school, high school? It's
grade 7 through 12, and they're going to have their first graduating class this year. Okay. Here you have a young woman is the best athlete in the school, is the president of the school, is the best actress in the school, is the best student in the school. That does something for you when you see that, because I remember as a teacher, there's a stand. You can ask any teacher. You ask a question. The boys all have their hands up. They're jumping out of the seats, and they have the wrong answer. And a little young lady is sitting there with her hand halfway up, and she's got the right answer. They learn, especially in the junior high, middle grades, girls learn that there's a different role for them. So they have to pull back. Now, we have mostly minority kids in Young Women's Leadership School. It's amazing to see how these young women have taken leadership roles. And it's a successful school. We created one in Chicago. And California's created 7. So I don't hear that constitutional question anymore.
Okay. Now, another one that you have is the talented and gifted students for young scholars. Tell us about that.
Okay, well, you see, this is a new one. We got a grant from Henry Luce Corporation that said, identify kids who have the potential to be scholars to go to college.
And what grade do you identify?
We are identifying them in the 7th grade, okay, in junior high, middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And we have around 7 schools throughout the city. And the purpose, of course, is identifying, you know, I don't have to tell you, Herman, but around 84% of the kids in our schools are minority kids. It's not hard to find a minority kid in the New York City school system. And what we're doing is we're going to train those kids, we're going to give them opportunities, we're going to make sure that they do get to college. We'll give them courses in training for SAT, we'll give them courses in writing, we'll give them courses in math.
Are you going to give them courses in the particular schools?
In their schools, you see. Look, we know this much. The school has to become the center of anything that's going to happen. You and I both agree. By the way, I think I heard that they sold the 110 Livingston Street. That's the latest rumor out there. The far away you are from a school, the less impact you have. So 110 has less impact, Albany has less, even the federal government is like far, far away. So we have programs in each of those schools. Then we'll bring them together. And it'll be interesting to see, but I guarantee you we're going to have a lot of fine young scholars going off to college.
But suppose you find a potential young scholar,
that's
say
right,
in the South Bronx.
Yes.
And you find 5 of them in 5 separate schools. How do you reach them?
Well, you know, to be quite honest, really gifted kids get into gifted programs. You understand? Like, we have one in East Harlem, the TAG School. Was one of the best schools in the city in terms of reading and math. That's called Talented and Gifted. Very fine school. Nobody knows much about it, but by the way, Carl Icahn was the guy who helped us fund that school. And he is now creating a charter school. We haven't discussed charters, but I think we have to do anything that can help the kids in inner cities because they are not getting a fair break.
Okay. Now you have something else that you call the Annenberg Initiative. Tell us about that.
Okay. The Annenberg Initiative, Walt Annenberg put up $500 million for the country. We were the first ARA consortium with New Visions and ACORN and the Center for Collaborative Education was the first grantees of Annenberg Challenge Grant. He gave us $25 million. There was a match of $25 million. And I think we were able to create close to 140 small schools, once again based on the East Harlem experience.
Which is, when you say small schools, what size is that?
Okay. On an elementary level, there shouldn't be more than 300 kids.
And how many kids in a class?
Well, you know, the truth is the same amount. You see, we're doing this basically with the money that schools are allocated. It's a different use of the money.
So how does it work out to how many per class?
Well, the classes are the regular class sizes that the rest of the city has. Now, in some cases, where a school has decided that they're willing to give up certain things for smaller classes, I think that should happen. That's why we think schools should have more autonomy if they're willing to be accountable. And if a school decides they'd rather have smaller classes and give up certain other cost items they have, fine. But the final analysis, they got to develop kids who can achieve.
What do you think is the ideal class size?
Well, you know, it's not so, you know, there's been studies on that. They say that 18, you know, there's a big study in Kentucky, that class size, I always think class size matters. Yeah, and I'll put it to you simply. If I go into a restaurant and a waiter's got 52 people to serve, and I go into another restaurant, he's got 22 people, I'm going to get better service. I mean, it's that simple to me. But the research indicates that you need 18 kids for it to really be significant. But I think the more you reduce class size, the better shot a youngster has. Teacher can pay more attention to you. It's not, you know, you don't get lost.
Listen, my wife, who's a 7th grade teacher, has 34 to 37 kids in the class.
That's too many kids. Right. There's no question there's too many kids. So the Annenberg Challenge has had many highly successful schools. The KIPP Academy in the South Bronx is an Annenberg school. Frederick Douglass. All these schools you notice that are in the newspapers, they're part of that Annenberg Challenge. Somehow, the papers don't like to give Annenberg too much credit.
Okay, now you started the school choice movement many years ago, and now it's gone up even to the President of the United States, because we really have an education president. That was the first initiative that he proposed when he became president. Well, what do you think of his program?
This is what I think. I think it's terrific that you had both parties saying education is the #1 priority. That wasn't always the case. And I'm happy to hear the president, especially a Republican president, say education of inner city kids is the #1 priority. Because it was just a few years ago, 1994, the Republican candidate was saying, they were telling him, close down the Department of Education. That's not the case anymore. Once we begin to center in and saying, we've got to educate the kids in inner cities, that's healthy for education. Now, it's going to be interesting because you mentioned choice. My own view, I think Bush will negotiate the voucher in order to get what he wants to do.
See, the people who have been giving advice to Bush say that the basic difference in his philosophy and that of the Democrats, which goes back to Lyndon Johnson, is that when the Elementary and Secondary Education Act came about, the federal money, which is only 7%, but still a significant percentage, was given to institutions, and that therefore they feel didn't make any difference because it was buried within the school. And the Bush approach is to have the money follow the students, and they feel that by doing that, it changes the whole philosophy of federal aid to education. Well, what do you think of that?
Well, this is what I think. The big discussion between voucher and, say, charters, we very much push charter schools because the voucher is such a political, it creates dissension, rather. But personally, I'm happy there's a voucher dialogue, and I'll tell you why, Herman. Years ago, when you saw me in some action here, I used to be a radical reformer. Now I'm a highly accepted moderate. You see, when I talk about charter...
You're not a compassionate conservative yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
But what I'm saying to you is, I think it's healthy for the system that the dialogue is out there, because it forces the system. But look, it's a simple concept. I'd rather be a client than a captive audience. See, that's why I think it's criminal, and I agree with this. It's immoral to keep sending kids to a failing school because they happen to live in that community. So the system better do something about it. And that's why I think charters are critical. I think this big issue of bringing in some privatization in terms of management can only help.
But the theory of the Bush education program is that if there's a failing school and it continues to fail for 3 years, then the federal money will be taken away from that school and given to the parents of the children.
Well, I think they should close failing schools.
I agree.
I mean, what other business has failing businesses and they just keep going forever?
Well, why do you think the Board of Education continues to maintain schools which have been failing year after year after year?
Because there are other considerations.
What?
The special interest groups. Right. There's nothing more important. And I think the system is beginning to understand. You know, when we say close a school, we don't give away the building.
The school is failing, though.
You have to close it, empty it. Bring in new staff, bring in new leadership, because nobody gives up buildings anymore. But I think that's what's wonderful about it. You know, the big weakness in the charter bills, as you know, is that they don't allow for space or capital money. So we ought to close these failing schools.
The mayor has provided a $10 million
And I give
fund.
you some credit for that, Herman, because you and I discussed that with Tony Coles. The mayor, for the first time, a municipality has provided funding for capital expenses of charter schools. That was quite an innovation, because the weakness of charter is there's no money for space. So we ought to close the failing schools and either put in another regular school or a charter school, and we overcome that problem of space for charter schools. But there is no excuse to maintain a school. Some schools have been failing for 20 years, Herman.
Okay, I certainly agree, but we keep pushing for those changes. Thanks for coming.
That's my pleasure.
You can reach us by email at our website, www.cuny.tv, or write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016.